Hello and welcome to Meeting People with me, Amal Pandya. Meeting People is a podcast where I have long conversations with rebellious, adventurous and sometimes courteous free spirits. Professor Crawford, good morning, or Paul if you don't mind.
No, that's fine, Amal, yeah.
Thank you for sparing the time. Now, you're a category creator, which is something that appeals to me very much, and the thesis of this podcast. And just for people watching, I'm going to hold up a copy of your first novel, I believe, something called Nothing Purple, Nothing Black, which I finished recently. And I'm also excited to say your second novel has come out this week. So I'm afraid I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but it's on the Amazon pre-order. But I thought just to kick us off, you're obviously you're not just a writer. You've created this category called Health Humanities. To kick us off, to set the scene, can you just talk to us about the anecdote or the story of the Wallace and Gromit collaboration? Can you talk to us about that, and then we'll take it from there?
Well, firstly, thank you for mentioning the first novel. That's many years ago now, 2002, and all these years later, after doing lots of non-fiction, The Wonders of Dr. Bent is out there, and there's a reason kind of why that relates to Health Humanities, the idea of Health Humanities and the recent work with Aardman. But let's start with Aardman, Wallace and Gromit, because for many people, they can't escape the brilliance of Aardman, can they? I mean, Shaun the Sheep, etc., etc. My own children have been brought up with these characters, and as you can see from the grey hair, I spent a lot of time watching Morph in the 1970s. So I was quite surprised when I got a call from Aardman whether I could meet up in London. They wanted to discuss something with me. So you don't refuse that type of invite. So turned up in London, and the exec producer said to me, we've seen your work in Health Humanities, which is all about advancing the arts and humanities for human health. And we'd like to work with you in mental health. Are you game? Are you up for this? Of course. So I led an application for £1 million funding, built a large team, production, clinical and research, with a large number of young people to co-create new animations to support conversations about life's challenges. It went out in the pandemic, and reached over 17 million within the first 4 months. Won lots of prizes, as these things do. Rather disappointingly, we didn't get an Oscar.
No.
And we'd been primed for that expectation, because in the first meeting in the executive office at Aardman, I was sat next to Dave Sproxton,
Who's Dave? Who's Dave Sproxton?
Well, Dave Sproxton and Peter Lord set up Aardman.
Of course.
Dave Sproxton actually invented Morph.
And then Wallace and Gromit, and then Chicken Run, and Shaun the Sheep, and all the rest.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, just spotted notifications coming on. I hope that doesn't interrupt too much. Yeah. So, I kind of pinch myself, really, Amal. As a professor, academic, writer, you don't necessarily expect to end up, at Aardman doing this kind of work.
Climbing down from that ivory tower and sort of being in amongst the populace directly in the digital realm. Yeah,
actually, it's quite interesting you say about the ivory tower. I never felt I was in an ivory tower. All my life's work. I don't know if I was walking around the tower and just happened to, get to be a professor without that kind of very, very strong sort of presentation of being in this intellectual place. I've just got on with it from the point of view of what can we do, how can we make changes, how can we help our fellow human beings. Yeah.
And these, so your kind of academic work was compressed into what was effectively 45-second videos in many ways. I mean, I'm sure there's lots that had to, by definition, be left out, but that exercise of producing to such a high standard, I'll link to the videos in the show notes to make sure everyone takes
What's up with everyone. Yeah.
What's up with everyone. It will take 3 minutes or so of your day to kind of have a look, and they're really well made and kind of very powerful and impactful with certain things like feeling the need to be perfect, and actually, you don't have to be perfect all the time, or worrying about someone else being, you're feeling like a failure or whatever it is, and you kind of compress the mental health challenges that come into sort of short segments with young people, and it was very impactful to see it. So I think what we can do now is just sort of step back and go to the top of the funnel before you kind of compress it into those. What is Health Humanities? Health Humanities is a discipline that you are the founding father of, which is much, is a very large discipline that I've come across. Can you define it for us? How did you get to kind of putting that category together?
Okay, so my history as from an academic perspective has been very much about literature, language, and so on, and working in mental health for many years. So when I started at the University of Nottingham, I'd completed my PhD in literature, and I'd also been trained in linguistics. And as soon as I landed, I set up a health language research group to advance interdisciplinary research in health language beyond simply doctor-patient interactions, because there are many, many other players in health in our society. That ended up with me getting a personal chair for that work, for my work in health language.
And sorry, just to kind of, health language is that more than how you talk to a patient or someone suffering?
Well, it's everything. It's everything. So it's all that communications, written, spoken, behaviours, also context and environments in which communication occurs. So all that was going on, and there was this thing called medical humanities,
right,
which I became increasingly aware of, to the point where I started to see that medical humanities was largely about using history, philosophy, literature to add to training curricula for doctors.
Right.
So, the lives of doctors in the 18th century, etc., etc. And I thought, actually, there are many more components and players to health than the medics alone. And I find it curious that the arts and humanities here was either directly medical related or medicalising. And so I felt there needed to be a shift. So back in 2006, I spoke to executive members of the Arts Humanities Research Council, one of our key councils in this research funders in this area. And I said, we already have quite a lot of medical humanities and welcome, support that, etc.
Right.
And I'm interested in how the arts and humanities can be more inclusive in this regard, in terms of health related, how it can be more applied to actually, the care side, what you can do with the arts and humanities to improve people's lives, and also moved to a more democratizing model whereby it's not simply a medical direction for everything in health, but arts practitioners, the general public, everybody, creative industries, the whole caboodle, are also generative and involved and active.
So you're pushing for, let's say, for example, you've been given a cancer diagnosis and your kind of world has been rocked, or you're suffering from schizophrenia or something like that. You're encouraging the normalization of using creativity, humanities, art, literature to kind of in the kind of care process. So not necessarily the treatment process, but the kind of the package that comes around, to be included more realistic, kind of with a bit more emphasis than just a clinical medical kind of approach that we have today.
So the history of this is in terms of the arts and humanities in the clinical settings and so on, we have the whole occupational therapy, expressive therapies, and so on. That's been going for many years. What's the idea I was proposing was that we're looking bigger than that. We're looking at not simply the clinical. We're not looking at simply interventions or injectables, as I call them. We're also looking at how people can be involved and self-help and other help beyond that. So getting towards a creative public health idea and the involvement of different assets, social and cultural assets, creative industries, that we're not simply seeing health as a matter for hospitals and clinics.
Okay.
And that gathering of cross-boundary thinking was put forward by me as Health Humanities.
Got it.
And it wasn't easy to start off with to get space for that.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about. You're operating at the intersection of multiple disciplines, not just like disciplines within science or within humanities, but you're actually crossing the boundary between the two of those. And so do you find you've kind of irritated people on both sides who kind of say, you stop bringing science into or social science into my field, or stop bringing your kind of wishy-washy stuff into my scientific method? Has that been a pushback you've had?
Not exactly. On the wishy-washy side, I'm interested in evidence from the through the two paradigms of knowledge, the science and the interpretation, and I don't have a hierarchical view of that. They are kind of parallel universes in a sense.
Yeah.
So I never really had a problem with that, because I co-wrote a book on the philosophy of science and healthcare. So I always felt I had a certain amount of, I had a sort of flak jacket on for that type of approach. I could tough that out when that came my way. What was interesting for me was, the whole business of bank accounts.
Okay.
So, research, science, interpretation, universities, knowledge formation, money, funding, vested interests. So when I opened up the lid on the limitations of medical humanities in the early 2000s and suggested a bigger frame that wasn't necessarily medically led,
yeah,
the stink came, I think, from that whole business of how is this going to alter our income streams.
Okay.
And established kind of medical humanities had a number of pushbacks on that. Fortunately, and I say fortunately for everyone, the communitarian, if you like, natural play of health humanities and what that thought leadership was doing meant that lots of people took it up worldwide. Yeah. It's now global, and I don't have the white cat and the big computer screen trying to control this whole manifestation. But it is interesting that, if you will, a non-institutional communitarian development won through.
Yeah.
In health humanities is I would say as known now as medical humanities within the space of 2 decades.
And it's interesting what you just zooming back to the kind of you don't put the interpretation side of things and the science side of things in a hierarchy. You kind of see them side by side. Do you just more generally, sort of zooming back, think the explanatory load on science is become too burdensome? We've kind of overemphasized. We look for empiricism everywhere, particularly in softer stuff. that leads to the desire for quantification.
Yeah.
In things that cannot be quantified, or like the whole Einstein thing of not everything that counts can be counted, not everything that can be counted counts.
Yes, I mean, science is important. I mean, if you need a laparotomy, you need that to be, scientifically, tested, and all these things which we love about science, we love for good reasons. However, the downside is action paralysis.
Okay.
So, for example, we see lots of positive effects, for lots of behaviours and phenomena, and then, from the science side, and this often happens on the medical side. Well, has that had a randomised control trial? Because that's the gold standard.
Double blind. Everyone likes to chuck in that it's double blind, whatever that means. But
And it's a dominance of the injectables idea, that everything must be medically injectable and tested through RCTs, etc., etc. Well, that's right with medications and things that go into your body and so on and so forth. But the idea that the only health approaches available are rubber stamped with this kind of imprimatur, that's it. Mm-hmm. Means there's action paralysis. I mean, for example, I give you a really clear example that came to me a while ago. Is a guy went to his GP, and his for help about his health, and his GP recommended a walk in the woods. Mm. And the guy was saying about this has really transformed my life. I'm so grateful for the GP and so on. Well, that's all well and good on an everyday level. People go to the GP for lots of things, and sometimes now GPs will kind of do the social cultural prescription. All well and good with that. I'm fine with that. But what that told me was just how people are so reliant on individuals have been rubber stamped as having that kind of scientific aura to actually advise quite commonplace, well understood ways of getting benefit in your life.
It's almost sort of the tyranny of the quantifiable, in so far as
it's like,
if that doctor had, I mean, the other way that could have played out is, I'm sure a lot of doctors think like this, and maybe that's the wrong example, but if I recommend a walk in the woods, and then this guy causes someone harm or kills himself or whatever, then I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. Whereas if I go down there's an 80% chance of him not killing himself if I prescribe him an antidepressant, and then he can have that injectable, I'm kind of my downside is covered, or my arse is covered, and so because I can point to the quantifiable rather than the kind of the the rather than your field.
There's an insufferable, sort of avoidance of the obvious. I mean, do I need to go to see my GP to see if smiling will help me? Or do I have to sort of get some sort of scientific permission before I smile to someone else? I just think that the Health Humanities was a great disruptor. I know we've heard that term in all the wrong contexts recently, but a great disruptor in terms of, hey, who is on stage when it comes to health? There are many, many, many people on stage, including the public themselves.
Okay.
Why are the public not in public health? Why are the public left out of public health? Why aren't the ideas and the innovations and the energies of wider society playing into health? There are, I don't know how many, do you know, Amal? I think there's something like 900 hospitals in the UK, something like that. And one can imagine a fairly sort of finite number of clinics and GP surgeries. And there are thousands of choirs out there. There are thousands of reading groups out there. There are thousands of theatre groups out there. The social and cultural assets in this country outstrip anything we've got in terms of centralised healthcare. So we need centralised healthcare, don't we? We need it. Okay, I get it. However, the health of the nation cannot simply be resolved through that route. We have to look at all the other stuff that's going on and mobilise that as well.
And this is one of the criticisms I've looked into. I've come across on Health Humanities, is that it does it serve as a distraction from clinical knowledge and practice. So, okay, sure, like I'm being flippant with my examples to kind of make the point, but if your arm is half dangling out of your shoulder socket, you don't want the doctor to kind of go, look, what you need to do is listen to a choir for 10 minutes and
exactly.
join a singing group.
Wouldn't it? Yeah.
But I think this is the problem with mental health as a category of sickness or wellness or health, is we just don't. It's very hard to diagnose, and it's very hard to isolate and pinpoint with specific solutions. So we've obviously seen this sort of Cambrian explosion of awareness about mental health, and everyone's campaigning, and but has the kind of, it sounds like you're saying there's still a big bottleneck in terms of the kind of availability of solutions to that kind of coming to be standardized.
No, not exactly. I think I've done a lot of painting in my life, and it seems to me that we're limiting the palette to a couple of colours when there can be many more. So in terms of clinical operations, in terms of evidence-based healthcare relating to conditionality, all good. But then we also need to look at the possibilities for how the social and cultural assets play in there, or help or assist, whether they add to the repertoire of clinical practice, for example, or how we empathise. That's that side. Whether the arts and humanities can influence the architecture, the environment, for comforting people and for making them recover better, etc. All these things. And then we play out into society generally. How would we survive without the arts and humanities? I mean, what would the world be without those things? And we learnt in the pandemic. That creative practices are so important to our health and well-being. But just to come back on that clinical point you made, because that was interesting. we need to retain our faith, as it were, in that whole enterprise of science and health, of course. But we shouldn't overlook that there are other evidences and also scientific evidences for not necessarily going down the obvious route. I'll give you an example. Back in 2013 to 18, I ran a big program, 1.5 million program called Creative Practices Mutual Recovery. This was about 13 projects, I think, some international, where creative practices were to support within patient, family carer and practitioner groups and across those groups to support recovery. So mutual recovery became quite an idea. It's actually carried on as a good idea, I think, about that reciprocity around shared arts and humanities. And the Royal College of Music worked in this programme with me, and they did a really tight study, as far as I was concerned, on the benefits of group drumming.
Mm-hmm.
And they did all the cytokine markers, saliva samples, cortisol levels, etc., etc. And group drumming showed to be as good as anything out there on the market for low to moderate depression.
Yeah.
So, it's also driving the science of the arts and humanities applied in clinical areas, but it's going beyond that as well.
And the other thing that's appealing to that example for me is that what's the downside? Not that much. If you go to a group drumming thing and it doesn't work, you're okay. You get put on SSRIs or something, you just don't know how you're going to react to that. You're going to create a dependency or benzodiazepine or whatever these kind of big, injectable solutions that the clinical side of things have for things like depression. There's a side effect and downside to that. Whereas, your risk the risk management in these things, it's better to start with things like solutions from the creativity space before going to the clinical space almost.
Yeah, well, I mean, the clinical space is actually us.
Yes. So what I'm getting wrong here is I keep siloing you, and what your whole thing is to remove the silos and to put yourself into the tent.
Well, it's yes.
Yeah.
I mean, well, it's the portability of the clinical. So hospitals and clinics, they're there, and people think about that as clinical, but actually it's the people that make the situation clinical. Where they're situated, where they are. So I've always felt that the health humanities has a winning edge because it's not a replacement strategy. It's not kind of getting into that kind of neoliberal sort of, let's make everything, more efficient and cheaper and cut costs and so on and so forth. And let's replace, medicine and its operations, pharmacy, etc., replace it with the arts and humanities. This is I don't know actually where that kind of nonsense came from, but it's been obfuscatory. What really Health Humanities has been about is how can the resources in front of our noses, often very low cost anyway, like a pencil and paper or making a mark on a wall if you want, to draw or other creative practices, how can these factor into your life, or how can you make use of these, and how can they have meaningful impacts for your health and well-being, your sense of self, your identity, your connectivity with others. That's it. And I think there's been a lot of achievements in this regard over the last 2 decades. Yeah. We hear more and more from parliamentary meetings and committees and policy makers. There's more and more chat about how the arts and humanities are what I call a shadow health service.
Yeah. Well, can we therefore talk about creativity in general?
Yeah.
And the reason why is I feel partly through the fault of perhaps the education system or just the paradigm that we live in, the way that we're brought up, the hangover from the kind of the industrial age or the 19th century in many ways, is that sort of creativity is often seen as this thing for a select few. Like, I don't know if you know the waggle dance that bees have. Have you heard of this explore exploit thing? That people like Rory Sutherland go on about. But I can just very quickly, when bees find a source of
to show people the route.
They do the waggle dance, but some bees, I think about 20% or 10%, don't follow the waggle dance.
Right.
They go off and just go into random places, and then they're the ones that find the new flowers.
Yeah.
Because if everyone followed the waggle dance, you just exhaust that pollination source.
Brilliant.
And then the problem with that is that's great. The problem with that is it tells that if you transfer that to human beings, you say, well, actually, 80% of us, 90% of us should just be clocking in, clocking out in a factory or doing mindless clerical work. And it's the select few that have the right to, or that are empowered or encouraged to to do drawing or do writing or reading and creating music. Whereas I feel like this democratization of creativity needs to happen in an internet age, because it'll just make us all better off for it. And I feel like the education system has not been that helpful in encouraging, oh, you're good at drawing, you go off and draw. You're good at maths, you don't, you go and do maths.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible. So what we've had is we've had a shift in public management of everything. We've had a shift to what I've called production line mentalities. It went into the hospitals, as you know, became quite target driven, made and continues to maintain a lot of threat cultures, which are they are diminishing compassionate responses across society. And that kind of actuarial approach, production line, factory style, came into the universities, and we're currently stuck with a lot of that in the university sector now, monetizing everything and, dry, measuring the pig to see if, making weight,
Has that encouraged more silo type behaviour? And so you're a kind of pushback of that because you're kind of you're more likely to get funding if you're going to do a more and more niche thing that kind of...
It's not quite as dark as that. So it's quite interesting. In that kind of sector, the university sector, they are struggling with the fact that a lot of the structures and processes are and remain anti-intellectual, ironically. So, particular outputs for particular disciplines, monographs versus co-authored stuff, quantitative evidence giving an extra gold star on top of that, whereas interpreting and understanding society and humans and so on, much harder to get over the bar, as it were, in terms of appreciation or credit. So those sort of structures and processes about intellectual work means that there are fake boundaries, unnecessary blocks to more imaginative, innovative, generative knowledge creation. So there's a rhetoric of interdisciplinarity going on in the UK and elsewhere.
Okay. That's encouraging.
And to be fair, UKRI, United Kingdom Research and Innovation, is, I think, getting it because they are looking more and more to big questions which require interdisciplinary teams to answer rather than compartmentalizing knowledge so much. So there are moves to shake this up, I think, but I would say some institutions are perseverating with traditional notions of purity, traditional notions of hierarchy and superiority in terms of knowledge formations. It's almost like there are a lot of comfort blankets out there operating.
Pattern recognition or habit.
A kind of inability to be open to the possibility that your own discipline is interdisciplinary and not as pure and segmented as you thought, and that you may find better ground, more fruitful ground, if you actually walked out of your office and walked to somebody else's space, or actually didn't sort of literally box yourself in.
So just going back to the creativity side. So what is creativity to you?
Yeah.
It's broadly or in abstract terms.
Yeah. Creativity, I think, is tuning into multiple and variant informations in the world, and looking to see. It's almost like one of those kaleidoscopes that you give to your kid with all the colours, and if you take all the little coloured beans out at the end, they all seem pretty limited. Oh, there's a limited number of things there. But when you turn the little machine and look through it, you see all sorts of different manifestations and shapes and patterns and possibilities. And I think that's where creativity comes, whether that's in painting and art, in writing, and in just thinking about our world and thinking about how things are and how things could be. And I guess AI now is like a superannuated kaleidoscope.
I had that on my kind of list of things I wanted to pick your brain on. So why don't we jump into that now? The hope is that it can create sort of mental bandwidth for people to therefore have, like with any technology, you're trying to move away from doing as much drudgery and drone work as possible. Going back to my bee analogy, but if therefore we can, AI is basically a supercomputer that kind of does a lot of that pattern recognition and puts it together and create me a song in the style of Dr. Dre, but with the lyrics of Shakespeare, and then you kind of put this sort of, which, how are you seeing that as a tool or as a source of challenge, perhaps?
Well, I think we're kind of, we're in a period where challenges and difficulties and catastrophes are almost like our daily breakfast. I mean, we're just getting that kind of very dismal 24-hour injection of news going on, and AI, as with all developments, as much as it seems to be a gift and a joyful possibility, it quickly turns sour as a potential threat. It's going to kill you, it's going to kill everybody, it's going to take over the world and so on.
Or take all our jobs.
Yeah, exactly. So we've had the Luddites earlier in history, and we'll have them again, I'm sure, with AI. And I don't know what the play out of that is, because we seem to be we seem to be jumping in big steps now as an acceleration of knowledge potential, I think. And we're, even though that's come from us as human beings, it seems to be leaving us behind, and we're almost holding on to the tail of this and wondering what it is we're holding on to. You know, some kind of event that we're holding on to,
Yeah.
and an unfolding, and we don't quite know whether that should be tamed or whether it should be experienced.
I think I'm very optimistic it'll create a whole new set of possibilities and categories that we don't even know or could think about now. A bit like with the invention of electricity, you couldn't have told someone, like, people will think in that paradigm, oh no, that's going to be bad for, you know, the gaslighters or whoever it is, you know, and but all the things that created that you couldn't possibly predict, even all the way up to the internet, for example. And we'll enter a new paradigm which will hopefully empower us, but and also help us get over this issue of, you know, creativity is not for me, or you know, Miss so and so told me at school that, you know, I better stick to the PE because I'm no good at. And I'll give you an example. Maybe I'm terrible. Oh, yeah, sorry. Take my older brother, for example. He's got a natural drawing of talent, let's say, ability. He can draw figures. Whereas I, you know, if I try, it just doesn't look the same. But you wind the clock forward to today, so that had that impact at school level where you just like that. Well, I'm just not going to do that. I'm never going to do that. Today, you know, I've got kids and they're always asking me to draw things, and so I get these sort of kids' books on how to draw a cat. And it's basically you draw a triangle, you draw another triangle, you draw a semicircle and whatever, and then you've got this sort of little nose, and then you follow a set of rules, much like AI does, and then all of a sudden you got a cat in front of you that actually looks fairly decent, and I really enjoy it. I kind of, and the kids love it, and I'm like, oh, I can draw a cat, and maybe next time I'll do the triangle slightly lower and make the you know, whatever, and it will look like the cat's sort of laughing or something. And but had I listened to, you know, had the rest of the population, had we all listened to Miss So and So back at school, or like, oh, my brother can do it, I can't do it, I'm useless, you know, I better, you know, stick to something else or find something else. That creativity just is therefore is locked up in a box for the most of the population. And almost, would you say that if we could normalize it from an early age, we almost wouldn't need Health Humanities to be kind of a formal approach?
I don't think this whole area of creativity, of how the arts and humanities relate to us or are valuable in society, can be boiled down into school curricula or boiled down to a kind of a linearity that we can do this. Step 1, step 2, step 3. You're all excellent drawers. Okay, step 1, step 2, step 3. Okay, you're all great singers. To be honest, I think the challenge we have going forward seems to be unlocking from some of the very simplistic notions of empowerment and some of the, what I see as an obscene focus on the individual. Individual accountability, individual responsibility, individual success, celebration of the individual, you know, cult of personality. We've seen a real big dose of that going on, aren't we, around the world? So I think going forward we need to unlock from some of these kind of mantras about like being empowered, and I think we need to somehow be allowed to be less and to be more reflective human beings, to not have that stress and threat of insignificance hanging over all of us all the time, and ones that perhaps get their foot onto a red carpet, whoa, fantastic, and everybody else, well, that's okay, just a jobbing life. I think there are stories, there are fabula sort of operating here, which are uncritically, I think, consumed.
Yeah.
It feels to me that people have somehow been groomed, shall we say, into a psychology of themselves and people around them, which is to do with a unit of, the unit one.
The unit of account.
Yeah.
Here is the individual. In the global south, it's the family maybe, or it's the village.
Yeah.
Historically, we need to, not throw
are you
the
an
baby out the
influencer
bath.
yet? Are you an influencer yet? I mean, you need to be an influencer. You need to be, prominent. You need to have all that measure of success to be successful as a human being.
So when you wrote your novels, you touched on
Yeah.
this earlier. Did you found that a lot of people are asking you, how much do you want to sell? How many copies do you think it's going to get?
Well, I think that's a kind of default position in society. As I say, I think that's a mantra that many people will fall into, and the first thing they'll say is, "Oh, have you sold a lot?" I'm not interested. And this isn't the key thing for me, and so those mantras are really disappointing. I kind of see them as part of like donut world. Have you had donut? Have a donut. Have a donut. And was your book a donut? Did it go into the airports? Was it a big selling donut? I don't care. What I care about, because my first literary agent was a Jewish emigre. He was a child caught up in Kristallnacht in Berlin. He escaped to the US and then came to London, and he was my first proper literary agent. He's gone now, bless him. But he was not only a wonderful person, but a great advisor. And he gave me a number of key pieces of advice. And one of them that stood out for me was when he said, always remember to only submit to publication fiction that you believe to be significant, that you believe to be at the best possible quality, to be something in itself and of itself, regardless of whether anybody reads it.
Yeah. So it's the old, it's almost the old marathon test. Would you run a marathon if you couldn't tell anyone about it?
Yeah. Exactly.
Like write as if no one's going to read it for yourself.
Well,
yeah. Obviously, there has to be a point of yeah.
I think that the two steps there, you have to anticipate readers to get the scaffold in place in the fiction to create the kind of hallucinatory journey that's successful. In terms from a readerly perspective. But you're right, in terms of whether that actually becomes a big readership or whatever, that is really in many ways outside of your control. You have to be focused on what you're going to put on the stage, and of course one hopes it will be received and prove useful, or people will enjoy it, or they will get something from it. But you cannot demand an audience to come in.
Don't do what you think will sell.
Some people do. I mean, some people are genre writers. I'm not a genre writer. I draw on genre in my literary fiction. But a genre writer, looking for, let me just get this just right because that will unlock you know, marketing people, they will love that and they will do that and so on. Do you know what? I've never wanted to be in that world, and it's not what I am for. If I'm successful, well and good. I'm not going to turn down the possibility of more readers, okay? But I think it's a sad day when that's the life.
So, going back to the day job, and let's take an example that you've written about. What can we learn from Florence Nightingale?
Oh, well, for a start, that project. Okay, so
let's remind people who Florence. I mean, we know there's a lot of people. You know, we did it at school at some point, but it'd be useful to have a primer again on who she was as well. So include that, however order you want.
Yeah. So I mean, Florence Nightingale's an interesting individual because she popped up. She was born in 1820, and she lived in Derbyshire for a lot of her early life, and returned to Derbyshire for periods of her life. And she died in 1910. And most people know of Florence Nightingale in relation to the Crimean War in the middle of the 19th century. And the reason they know about her is because in that period in the 19th century, war reporting really started in the Crimean War. So newspapers were full of stories, photography was coming in, etc., etc. So, and Nightingale herself was from a very rich and influential family. So she had all the springboard she needed to be, if you like, the original influencer, or one of the original influencers, really. So, and long before social media. But people will think about that burst of popularity and fame around her treatment of, or her looking to treat wounded soldiers in Istanbul, Sebastopol, when they came over from battle. However, most of her important work was done after the Crimean War.
Right.
So, her changes in public health, the hospital design, the advance of nursing, sanitation, ventilation, all those aspects, the use of statistics came obviously from that experience of war and death and how to improve hygiene and so on. All that came and all that work went on her return. And that is a period that most people don't realise. Florence Nightingale was largely housebound. She had a kind of post-COVID syndrome from the infection of brucellosis on unpasteurised food. We don't know which food, milk or meat, but so she worked mostly from her bed, Amal, for this period. So we're talking the middle of the 1850s through to 1910 when she died. Most of that time she was housebound and suffering fatigue, depression, pain. And so I always say to colleagues in the university side, don't knock working from home, because Florence Nightingale was a great example of a real mover and shaker from her pillow.
Well, it removes any excuses, you might have in many ways, like, I just don't quite feel up to it today, or I can't concentrate at this desk. I want to go to the cafe. I need to go to the cafe. I need to go to the library, and then all of a sudden you've lost half. That's you're listening to my university life here, but if she can, she's got that desire to contribute, as you mentioned, and she's going to do it from her bed, her sick bed, if she needs to.
She used that to good effect in terms of managing visitors, managing important people, keeping them waiting, and all those sorts of things. So it worked for her on one level, but she also struggled with as we all did during the lockdowns. She struggled with that kind of relentless four walls situation.
So that takes us on. You've done some work on cabin fever, is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we're such socialized creatures, right? In prison, to people who are generally, as a part of the subset of the population, less interested or willing or have a track record in kind of conforming to what society wants from them, rightly or wrongly. The first thing you do to them if they're not behaving is you put them in solitary confinement. Or not the first thing, the ultimate thing, because it is such a punishment. And it's same with kids, right? You want to, a lot of disciplinarians will advocate, a tool of discipline will be to exclude your child from the room and put her in
and also perhaps into schools.
Yeah. So, and you see the impact it has on kids when you try and threaten that, and they kind of fear that kind of. So, what can we learn from cabin fever?
So much. Let me just tell you a little story about that, because I was actually in lockdown. My wife at the time was overseas, and it didn't take long for me to feel the struggle in terms of the social isolation, the purpose to my day, etc. One of the first things I did was buy a monocular and a bird book online, so I could actually extend my eye out of my space and into the trees and the beyond. I thought that was a good idea. But I was speaking to my son, who's a brilliant data analyst in Canada, and I said to him, Jamie, do you actually... I can't seem to read anything or see anything about the folk syndrome cabin fever. I can't even read a history about it. I mean, it's a common term. People talk about cabin fever. I can't see anything. Can you double check for me? Can you look and see using your data analysis skills? He came back to me. He said it's pretty much empty. There's much.
And if you'd asked ChatGPT, it would have made something up. So anyway, yeah.
Jamie's all onto AI and data analysis. Yeah. Don't you worry. But in that period, that's how quickly we're moving. Right? We didn't talk about AI much in that period. That's worth thinking about, isn't it? Yeah. I said, look, why don't we write a book together, son? Why don't we write a history of cabin fever? Because there must be one out there. Let's find it. So we investigated that, and we identified that cabin fever, we thought initially it's to do with ships. It's to do with cabins on ships, right? The confinement in a cabin on a ship, that's what it's about. And we found it wasn't. It was to do with Irish cabins, the very small kind of one-room cabins in Ireland in the mid-19th century, where there was a big outbreak of typhus.
Wow. Okay.
Right. And the typhus spread because people were crowded into small cabins in Ireland. And then what happened was, when many Irish left Ireland and went to North America, they took typhus with them to North America. But they also took their cabin building skills. And those cabin building skills went into all that pioneering that went on in the north there. And in the remoteness, building cabins. And what happened was a transition from physical fever in typhus, the physical fever, to a real sense that of the isolation, the psychological fever of being isolated, confined for long periods of wintering out and so on. That's where the history comes. And then we looked at NASA space research, we looked at penal research about solitary confinements, and we looked at all the deleterious impacts of confinement and being forced to be solitary or together in a constrained environment. And then we looked at the antidotes. And, NASA's been working hard on this, with its commercial spaceflight people about going to Mars. But the whole world went to Mars in the pandemic. It was an analog station for understanding the impact on people's mental and physical health of being confined for long periods. And we're still mopping up the mental health impacts of that, of billions of people actually being in forced confinement.
There's a good Tom Hanks film, Castaway.
Right.
Have you seen that? I don't know if you've seen that, but it's a great. Obviously, he's on. Most people have seen it. Spoiler alert! But he's on an island and he ends up forming a relationship with a volleyball. I think
that's right.
Not a physical relationship, but like a friendship. And he's got he cuts his hand.
It was a more deformed ball than a volleyball.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And he's got because he cut his hand and it bled, and he put his hand on the ball and threw it in anger.
It was Wilson,
exactly. Yeah. And there's a really sad moment when he's escaped from the island and Wilson floats off, and he can't leave the boat, and he's shouting after Wilson, and you just feel his and obviously, and he's back on terra firma with society, and he looks at all the food waste and things. Like they have a party when he's back, and he sees all this uneaten food that people are scraping. It's this kind of really. There was a bit also in the film where he tries to commit suicide, but he can't. He can't hang himself. It doesn't work, and it's probably one of a good creative manifestation of solitary isolation.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's iconic, isn't it? And the impacts are real, and antidotes are real as well. So
so how do you if you've been in isolation for a long period, how do you and what's the antidote to that?
Well, I mean, in our book we sort of we corralled the antidotes that seem to be out there based on the evidence. One of them that's key from NASA, actually, NASA research in their analog stations and also space experience, is purpose to the day. So we've recently had, I think, a couple of astronauts stuck up in the space station with failed return flights, and they will be busy for around the clock, and they will be given, if you like, busyness. They will be given lots of tasks, because having purpose is a key protective. And a lot of people during the pandemic, the lockdown situations, people were having to be very creative. They were actually turning to a lot of creative life to maintain their mental health, as you know. And they tried to get structure and purpose to their days. That was a very protective move. But not everybody was in the same situation. Not everybody could reach to those resources. We had a lot of domestic violence going on in that intense cauldron of isolation. And we also had a lot of people who really struggled to find those antidotes. Creative practices, creative engagement is an antidote. Obviously, access to nature is an antidote. Difficult in space, of course, but here on the Earth, that was another one.
I think the lockdown policies really demonstrated the differences we have in various strata of society, because you had people who were like, I had a cracking lockdown, did loads of gardening, got loads of sun, learned to bake, did a load of barbecues, got through loads of books, and and then you had people half a mile down the road in a high-rise tower with 3 kids, who weren't at school, and domestic violence, and
exactly.
It was. I think that sadly wasn't included in the calculus.
No,
When
exactly right. And a lot of people were alone together. A lot of people were alone together.
Yes, you had a partner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no, you're quite right. For some people they had the mentality to turn to sanctuary. Many other people, their mentality turned to the prison, as one might expect. The prison-like situation, the sort of thing that hostages, people on solitary journeys by boat and other experiences can sometimes feel, that pressing in of the walls, that limitation. So some people are able to naturally, I think, switch to sanctuary and others not. Some were, if you like, in a situation which made that very difficult in terms of their lived accommodation. So we saw lots of impacts here, and I think that it certainly impacted on my writing of the recent novel, The Wonders of Dr. Bent, which is, it's about a maverick leading psychiatrist who tries to humanise a high security setting.
Okay.
And I guess, that whole experience of the damaging effects of a prison-like environment must have been very much on my creative mind at the time, and infused the novel in that way. So it's an interesting area to continue to look at, is how we are in particular places and spaces, and what the result of that is on our mentalities. How do we recover from mental trauma? How do we recover from the oppressive quality of our environments?
And does that creation of purpose translate beyond, people, social isolation, beyond other mental health? You speak to any, you go to a self-help book, or you speak to any kind of whoever out there at the moment is dominating the sort of the spiritual coaches and
the wellbeing world.
Yeah, there's a lot of, have a target, have a goal, have an aim, work to it,
okay,
write it down.
Okay, so I guess the world has started to move more and more to packaging everything. Everything's packaged, packaging well-being, packaging everything. And, we have to be part of that, making resources available. I think that's important. Whether it helps people to have a format, or have an aid memoir, or their technology talking back to them about their health, or how many times they should do this, or you've been in a 4-wall situation for 3 hours now, or you haven't looked up from your computer screen.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. These nudges and
But I would say the new challenge for me, as I see it in this very fast-moving changes we're having, is how we deal with proliferation. How do we avoid being overwhelmed by informations, by nudges, by everything? So dealing with proliferation hasn't really come to the fore. It's like we're all tumbling and turning under a big wave of change.
Yeah.
And we're not quite sure how to emotionally adjust to that. So we had the pandemic, like tight lockdowns in the space, and then almost immediately following, it seems, we've got this kind of like, it's proliferating. Everything's
It almost, you get these protocols of, you want to get sunlight 10 minutes from waking up, and then you want to do an hour of journaling, and then you got to kind of have a cold plunge,
segmentation,
and then do 20 minutes of meditation, and then then you can do an hour's work, and then it's like, hang on, I've got a job to do. I've got like a life to live, and I've got kids running around to get to school, whatever. And it's just like not. It's too much. This packaging thing is a good observation because there's too many kind of easy, neat solutions out there for people who don't have the bandwidth to kind of even start processing it.
I think so. I think we kind of post ad hoc. You know.
Yeah.
Ad hoc seems to be, old times.
So, can you tell me about your writing process, particularly for fiction? You're not a full-time fiction writer. You're not. So, how do you do it? Do you do it in the morning before your day starts, kind of the day job begins, or do you commit time to it and go?
Yeah.
What's the package? Yeah, but what works for you in terms of. Or what even makes you want to do it? Like, is it another medium to kind of get your work across, or is it purely, again, as we talked about earlier, I just want to write this as a way of almost an autodidactic tool to kind of focus my thoughts and.
I guess it could be all of those things for most writers. Writing full time is a bit of an interesting idea because. I think I live full time.
Yeah.
I live full time, and the writing is second to that. I don't really have a strong regular approach to writing. I feel that I'm kind of tuned into when I'm feeling in a mood, or I feel I have particular ideas I want to convey, or I have a mission with a piece of writing. All those things may come in quite irregular patterns for me. So it could be, I'm just ready to, I don't know, chill with reading a book, and then when I get on the bed and I open the book for a little nighttime read, I'm thinking, crikey, that is something. Now that is something, and I'll reach over and I'll tap away, and may find I've done half a chapter before I fall asleep, or I've just made a note for the morning. So I don't have a schedule. I don't smoke. I don't live in an attic. I don't do kind of writerly poses in particular garments. And I go to cafes a lot, so that's a writerly thing to do. But one thing I do is I write. A writer is somebody who writes. I write, and I've written for most of my life. I sometimes scare myself by looking back at all my back catalogue of files, deletions, revisions, how many versions of a novel did I get to, and when I look at the textscape of my life, that is the hidden textscape, not the actual published textscape. It's pretty awesome.
So you're writing anyway.
Sorry?
And you're writing anyway all the time, and a novel is a kind of fallout of that. I mean, I guess the danger is there's a tension in that, for a lot of people, unless they have that package, or and therefore it won't get done, and maybe therefore they shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, So, we're all different, right? So some people will, need packaging, will need frames for self-motivating and so on. I've never really had a writer's block. They talk about that a lot. I've never found that myself. And novels are different to what I've been doing in the kind of academic world, or literary criticism, or the linguistic stuff, or mental health stuff I've been writing, or the history stuff. the novels is more about conversation, because it's where you envisage and anticipate a kind of a shared experience with the reader. So I write the frame, I put the scaffolding up, but the hallucination, apart from my own when I'm writing, the hallucination is for each reader, and what they bring to it and how they work on my scaffold is for them. They will probably read something quite different to my authorial, intention. They may have transference issues with one of the characters, and they may like this character for the wrong reasons, if that makes sense, and they may not like this character. I don't know. They may find this is important, that's important. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, fiction is as I think David Lodge said, the writer and critic, the greatest repository of consciousness.
And what do you think makes a good villain?
A good villain, that's a beautiful thing.
Sorry, not a good villain, but what makes
I thought you were talking about Donald Trump for a minute.
No, I think a lot of stories are only as good. Heroes we kind of crack. We know what they can be flawed, they can be kind of roguish, or they could be kind of pure. But a story is often as good as a villain in many ways.
What grabs in a villain? I think probably for me, I say these kind of stereotypes or these kind of models that we work off. I find the scariest people the ones that are not quite so visible, or they seem to be what they are from your first take. So people seem that's a perfectly reasonable person, they're doing this, they're doing that, yeah. But they are operating in a parallel sense. They are actually entirely different to what they are to you, or what they seem to be.
So there's an almost, you struggle. There's a jarring dissonance in some ways. I think there was a villain in a couple. I don't know if you ever watched Luther, the detective series.
I didn't watch that. No, I saw the adverts for it.
Yeah, there's in the later series. There's a psychologist and a surgeon, very middle class, and they practice in kind of sexual violence, abducting people, and one of the things that made them, a powerful villain was that you just wouldn't think it. Like they were educated, they had that, they had all those kind of tip marks that you would associate with someone that you would just intuitively trust. If they offered to give you a car ride, you would take it because it's in the Volvo or whatever. And,
that's pretty scary, right? And sadly, it reflects many realities.
Yeah.
The from a writing perspective, though, it's always you always have to be agile, I think, as a writer, to what we might think of as fixed expressions creatively, because people are watching so much Netflix these days. I think that they start to predict what's coming in this particular film. Mm-hmm. This guy is he's so kind. He's just he's just picked up that puppy and and he's helped a poor guy have a sandwich and a cup of coffee who's out on the street. What a guy, what a guy, what a guy. And you're thinking, okay, I think this one's going to be the bad guy. I think this one's going to be the villain. So, the great thing with writing is, as much as some of these fixed expressions or fixed positions operate in literature, writers will always disrupt or subvert or undermine or play differently. It's almost like chess. They'll find different strategies for both entertaining but also informing and illuminating in terms of ideas. So I think that's the great offer of meaningful novels, if I can put it that way, novels that are keen to engage in ideas, non-donut novels. I think that's the joy of them, because when you buy one, when you pick one up, when you stroke the cover and read the blurb and see if it sits with you and your current wishes for reading, when you take that out the bookshop, it's like a mystery tour straight away. You have no idea what kind of scaffolding is going to be in this one. Now, of course, you get a little bit of shall we say, obviousness about this, because thriller section, crime section, romance, right? So some people go into the donut world on this. Then the other side of it is like mystery tour, that this book is not like situated quite like that, or the suspicion that this is supposedly a thriller or supposedly this or supposedly that, but when you read it, you
don't know where it's taking you.
Yeah.
Can I ask you about the character Crystal?
Yeah.
In your first novel, again, I mean, it's not a huge spoiler alert for people who are hopefully going to go and read it. But there's a character who suffers from schizophrenia, and one of the things he wants to his voices command him to do is to go and waste people's time. And I kind of, it really resonated with me as a kind of, I've been in a rush many times, and you kind of, the sort of the thoughts that come to you when you think someone's purposefully wasted your time when you're trying to get somewhere quickly. It's bad enough when someone does it accidentally. It was a very powerful kind of character trait that this manifestation of this guy's mental illness was to kind of go and waste people's time, and that was the way he could sate his voices. How did you come to that? Was that an experience you had in the clinic? Was that someone you treated, or?
No, that was the operation of the brain that is not my own.
Yeah. The muse.
The brain that is not my own found its way to that idea. I mean, part of the deal seems to be, in working with a brain that's not your own, is to recognize, or you believe, or you have this kind of sense that the effort is to recognize when the thought in the brain that's not your own comes up. And I certainly recognize that, gosh, that's painful. I can feel, I actually could feel that viscerally, the tension of somebody being stopped, for example, at the start of the book. No big spoiler alert for the start of that book, being stopped to get their train when there's a time pressure. I could feel the pain of that. I could actually sense that. And I thought, well, as you say, sating the kind of the command, hallucinations and so on, the way that this character was actually led by their mental health difficulty, that kind of transaction that, I waste people's time, and the kind of threat that I'm living under reduces. I thought that's I'm having that.
It's a really bad thing to be thought of as. It's one of those non-harmful, or it's one thing to be violent and all the rest, putting aside the kind of criminal categories of harm. Being accused of being a time waster is, and you manage with that character to, we kind of deeply empathize with him at the same time, which is also kind of this dual occurrence, which is quite powerful. But as you say, I really felt the kind of, I could really empathise with the victims of his time wasting in a really kind of almost frustrating sense.
Yeah, I've always been interested in the doubleness of victims, especially in regard to major mental health problems like paranoid schizophrenia, where people do terrible things when they're under the kind of that condition. I've been interested that there's a doubling of victimhood, in the sense that the individual who, with that distorted view of reality, does terrible things, also is a victim of themselves as much as the people out there that they also impact on. And I think that kind of theme is really important, that kind of how we, do we always need to be a prime and punishment society where we prime people to be dangerous? Actually, very often humiliating people increases violence. Leaving people with paranoid schizophrenia to fend for themselves on the street and in shabby accommodations very often, and then we go, oh, they've done something terrible. Oh, Cal surprise. I mean, but then the punishment comes in then. So, like The Wonders of Dr. Bent is quite an interesting follow-up novel, even though it's like 23 years later, where, the whole business of how are we dealing humanely with people with diminished responsibilities who do terrible things? Do we have the right supports and interagency set up to ensure there isn't a double victimhood here? And I'm not convinced we're there at all. And in fact, recent cases show we're, as a society, we think we're much better than we are in relation to mental health.
Interesting. Have you read Resurrection by Tolstoy?
I haven't, no.
No, okay. I'd really recommend it.
Okay.
It's one of the. He writes it later in his life. He's become much more cranky and spiritual. But this novel is about an aristocrat who kind of, to many of his peers, accuse him of turning into a do-gooder, and he goes around sort of. He's trying to give his land away to his peasants, and they don't want it. They're kind of confused. But then he kind of gets into prison reform, and obviously some of the stories they talk about in 19th century Russian prisons, particularly to the kind of the mentally afflicted, but just the kind of injustices that would happen, the treatment. And he said, look, it doesn't stop bad behaviour. It's no deterrent factor. And he comes at it from a very spiritual kind of Christian perspective, which is like, we're all fallen, we're all very sinful creatures. We therefore do not have the ability to kind of pass judgment on someone else's sin and lock them up and detain them. And we need to be more discerning. And obviously we've come a long way since prison conditions, or kind of the treatment of people who cause harm publicly has got a lot better. But you're arguing that actually we need to be even more discerning and try and figure out that yes, someone is a victim of their behaviour, but they are also a victim of their own behaviour, and there are things that have caused that which we couldn't possibly understand.
Yeah, and it's multifactorial. So people with serious mental health problems often live in the most deprived environments, with financial constraints and difficulties, with less access, I think, to the resources that will keep ourselves healthy and low stressed and so on. So that's why I said, like, kind of thinking of Dostoevsky's prime instead of crime, prime and punishment. I think we are in a prime and punishment society, and I think that is not advancing us very far at all. So yeah, I mean, certainly it's been emotional for me with The Wonders of Dr. Ben coming out, because as we know,
what can you tell us? I mean, you've told us a bit about it already. Is
story,
it?
you mean?
Yeah. What can you give away without giving it away?
No. It's a tale of two lives coming together. The one is Jason Hemp. He's an English lecturer, and he tries as an amateur detective to avenge the death of his twin brother. And he basically enters a world that he doesn't understand, and is very, difficult and challenging, shall we say. So I don't want to give any spoilers. And his world comes into that of Dr. Bent, who is a refractory maverick character, a goth psychiatrist who rides a Harley, but he's a leading thought leader, a leading person in psychiatry, who's directing Foston Hall, a high security facility for people who are, a grave and immediate risk to the public. And their worlds come together. Dr. Bent is a wounded healer, and we see that kind of, battle between that past and the present. And he's a reforming doctor. He attempts to make Foston Hall a more humane and comforting and comfortable place for people who have arrived there with, hospital orders, for diminished responsibility, like recently the individual Valdo Callicane in Nottingham who did such terrible things. So, I mean, the novel predates that horrible event of Valdo Callicane, but I guess bears on it because there's a tension in the novel between the ethics of reform and the ethics of punishment.
Amazing. Well, and it's out this week, which is very exciting.
It's out there. We got some slight delay came in because there was a cyber attack of the major UK book printers.
Oh wow.
It's actually, I think the official publication date now is the 18th of March. But your lovely paperbacks can be pre-ordered. And hopefully this one will turn into a film. Nothing Purple, Nothing Black had a film deal with Jack Emery, but the British producer, but he became very ill and his production company folded, unfortunately. Jack is actually okay, he survived, but his production company didn't. So I missed the film, I missed the silver screen then. Hopefully it'll come back with The Wonders of Dr. Bend.
Well, everyone, you heard it here first, so, somewhat reasonably first. As you know, I like to wrap these conversations up with a closing question I ask all guests. In that you have a 10-year time frame to make a prediction, because predictions are nothing more than tax-free entertainment for us to kind of enjoy. Something you'd like to happen, or something you think will happen, like in the true sense of prediction, something that you think will happen in the next 10 years, and or both. So
okay. I think individuals worldwide, I hope, will lose their addiction to celebrity.
Interesting. That's you think that will happen, or you hope it'll happen?
I think it will have to happen if societies are to be happier.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned this earlier, didn't you? Kind of the desire to be an influencer for its own sake. Like, there's a big push amongst young people to kind of, the gamification of your phone, and getting likes, retweets, followers, and you end up doing banal, stupid things like eating as many burgers as you can in a 10-minute window or something. It's like at some point that actually, you'll build a following by doing meaningful work, and you'll get lots of likes if you create value.
I think the issue for me is that existing these days seems to be it seems to be necessary to fully exist these days to be part of an elite, a celebrity elite. Everybody else is junk.
Yeah. The rest of us are just
we're junk. We're it's moving towards a split between those who seem to be meaningfully existing and those who are non-entities. And
Right.
it's damaging the mental health of the world.
I can't remember who it was who said most of man's problems are caused by the inability to sit in a room on your own for an hour.
Exactly.
And just be that ability to be at ease
Yeah, exactly.
with yourself and who you are.
Exactly. It's
Well, hopefully your work will carry on pushing us into that direction and this sort of into a tradition of purpose rather than kind of ego for the sake of it or following for the sake of it. Where can people find you, Paul? You're on Twitter, you're on X, I believe.
you can find anything easily on Google, Paul Crawford. You'll find me, and my author website is paulcrawfordauthor.com. And I am not a celebrity, and if readers should make me one, then it's a shared event because
Well, thank you. Please keep up all the good work you're doing. It is very valuable. We need people to link disciplines together, to kind of spot things that fall between the cracks and kind of try and join them up. And that is the kind of sign of a true creator. And there's also the very purpose of why this podcast exists, is to speak to people like you. So I'm really grateful for the time. Would love to have you on again soon. And in the meantime, please everyone visit paulcrawfordauthor.com or Google Paul Crawford, University of Nottingham, and let's all buy that book. Give us the name again.
Sorry? The Wonders of Dr. Ben.
The Wonders of Dr. Ben.
Yeah, and thank you for the conversation. I forgot it was a podcast.
Great. That's all I want. I'll take it. That's as much a compliment as I can hope for. Thank you everyone for joining. See you next time.
Yeah, take care.
This has been Meeting People. I've been your host, Amal Pandya. This is a podcast produced by Matt Cooper with music composed by Loverman.